Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Owen Matthews had always been a simple, methodical, and loyal man. Working as a forest ranger around Tacoma, Washington, he lived a quiet life with Rachel, his wife of 10 years. They had a comfortable routine, peaceful weekends, short trips to nearby towns, TV series watched on the couch, and a quiet understanding that didn't need grand gestures. They didn't have kids, but they were planning to adopt soon. Among friends, they were seen as a solid couple, the kind who had found a rare balance. On social media, a few photos together showed genuine smiles, affectionate captions, and small glimpses of special dates. There were no big conflicts or visible resentments. For Owen, this was love in its most mature form, stable, predictable, and safe. Rachel was a teacher at a local public school, loved by her students and respected by her coworkers. She usually got home in the late afternoon, made dinner while Owen took care of the plants in the backyard, and they'd share slow conversations about their day. On Sundays, they sometimes went on easy hikes with the dog they'd adopted years ago. On long holidays, they'd often drive to small inns in the countryside. They had a small but steady circle of friends, including Marcus Klein, Owen's best friend since high school, with whom he played basketball on Saturday mornings and shared a bond that felt almost like brotherhood. Marcus was a regular at their barbecues, birthdays, and holidays. To Owen, it was nearly unthinkable that he'd ever need to suspect both Rachel and Marcus. It was during one of those hikes, on an ordinary weekend, that Owen felt something strange, a slight tingling in his arm, sudden dizziness, and a feeling of breathlessness. He blamed it on the heat and dehydration, but Rachel insisted he go to the emergency room. At the hospital, initial tests showed abnormalities in his white blood cells, and within days came the diagnosis: Owen had a rare blood disease that required a long hospital stay, intense chemotherapy, and daily monitoring. The shock was immediate. Rachel cried beside him, holding his hand tightly. She promised she'd be by his side every step of the way. Owen believed her. There was no reason to doubt. Those were days of adjustments, calls to family, work notifications, shifting into a new reality neither of them had expected. The hospitalization began on a gray morning, with Owen trying to keep his spirits up as he said goodbye to freedom for an indefinite amount of time. Rachel organized everything, brought clothes and books, and put up a small photo collage of the two of them in his hospital room. In the first few days, she was there every day, with smiles and tight hugs. She posted hopeful messages on social media, things like, "We'll beat this together," and "Nothing can separate us." Owen felt fear, but he clung to the feeling that he wasn't alone. Weeks passed like this, between tests, strong reactions to medication, and restless nights. Rachel, though present, started alternating her visiting hours. She said she had to take care of loose ends, cover for coworkers, and manage the house. Nothing out of the ordinary, Owen thought. What he felt was gratitude for her holding things together on the outside. He could never have imagined that, outside those hospital walls, something completely opposite to love was being built. In Owen's mind, Rachel was the foundation keeping everything steady. His treatment progressed with small victories, and doctors finally started talking about the possibility of discharge. That's when a quiet twist began to form, though he still couldn't see it. While making plans to surprise Rachel with the good news, Owen had no idea that the deepest pain he'd ever feel wasn't from the illness, but from what he was about to discover. Owen woke up that morning with a different feeling. The doctor, after another round of tests, walked into the room with a restrained smile and said the results were better than expected. The medication had worked faster than they thought, and if things stayed stable over the next 48 hours, he'd be discharged earlier than planned. Owen, stunned and relieved, held back tears hearing the news. After weeks locked in white-walled rooms, surrounded by machines and awkward silences, he'd finally have a chance to go home. His father, who had come from Oregon for a quick visit, happened to be at the hospital that day. When he heard about the early discharge, he offered to drive Owen home himself. Owen happily agreed but asked for it to be a secret. He wanted to surprise Rachel. He'd prepare flowers, maybe an impromptu dinner, and tell her everything while looking into her eyes. On the morning of discharge, he woke up earlier than usual. Ava, the nurse who'd been with him since the beginning of treatment, helped with the final preparations and quietly wished him good luck. Owen thanked her, not realizing that this brief goodbye wouldn't exactly be the end. With paperwork signed and medical clearance in hand, he left the hospital with his father, breathing in the outside air like someone reconnecting with a forgotten part of themselves. On the way back, they didn't talk much. Owen was focused on what he'd say to Rachel, how she'd react, whether she'd cry with happiness. He pictured the scene in his head like a movie reunion. He expected her to be surprised, emotional, running into his arms. There wasn't a hint of suspicion, not a trace of doubt. In Owen's world, everything still revolved around love, trust, and a fresh start. When they reached his street, Owen's heart started racing. He asked his father to wait in the car, saying he wanted to make the surprise happen alone. He grabbed the small bouquet he'd bought at a flower shop near the hospital and stepped out smiling, even though his body was still weak. As he approached the front gate, something caught his eye. Marcus Klein's car was parked there, pulled up to the curb, partly covered in dry leaves. He found it odd. Marcus didn't usually show up during the day without warning, especially during work hours. Owen didn't immediately get suspicious. He figured maybe Marcus was there to help Rachel with something around the house. He walked to the back door, the same one they used when coming back from hikes. It was unlocked. He entered quietly, trying not to make noise, imagining Rachel's reaction when she saw him. He took 2 steps and heard a muffled laugh from the living room. The sound was familiar, but out of place. He moved a few more feet, leaning against the wall, until he could partially see the room. And then he stopped. What he saw took the breath from his lungs. Rachel was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, with Marcus beside her, way too close, smiling in an intimate way. In one quick motion, she rested her head on his shoulder while he casually ran his hand up her thigh. This wasn't an ambiguous scene. There was no room for confusion. It was clear, direct, final. Owen's world, carefully built over years, collapsed right in front of him, in complete silence. He felt his heart race, not from the excitement of the surprise he'd planned, but from the blow of a betrayal he'd never even considered. The flowers dropped from his hand without him noticing. When Rachel finally saw him, she instantly turned pale. Marcus pulled away like someone waking from a nightmare. No one said anything for the first few seconds. The silence now was deafening. Owen stared at both of them, feeling his chest burn with a pain no medication could ease. That image would never leave his memory. And though he didn't yet know what he'd say, he already knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The silence was broken by Rachel, who let out a barely audible whisper when she saw Owen standing at the entrance of the living room. Her look was pure panic, as if in a single second she had grasped the full weight of what had happened. Marcus froze, hands in his lap, avoiding any movement that might make things worse. Owen, eyes locked on both of them, took a deep breath and stepped forward. The pain was visible on his face, not explosive anger, but an open wound. The words took time to come, but when they did, they were sharp and cold. He asked only what was necessary. How long had this been going on? Why? How could she do this? With each question, Rachel shrank back on the couch, as if trying to make herself smaller in the face of the damage she'd caused. She didn't try to deny it. There was no point. Looking down, voice trembling, she admitted it had started just a few weeks after he was hospitalized. She said she felt alone, scared, that she cried almost every night thinking he wouldn't come back. That Marcus showed up with ready-made dinners, comforting words, and that slowly, things took a different turn. That the first kiss happened on a night when she couldn't stop crying, and after that, they kept meeting, as if it were a relief from the pain she carried. Owen listened in silence, but his expression was that of someone who no longer recognized anything in front of him. Marcus tried to speak up, saying it was never intentional, that it just happened during a fragile moment. But Owen cut him off with a look so heavy it made Marcus fall silent immediately. His best friend, the one who'd grown up beside him, who knew all his stories, who'd been with him through every phase of life, was sitting in his living room with his wife. And even with their words, nothing explained it, nothing justified it. Owen simply said that both of them had to leave the house right then. Rachel tried to argue, stood up, moved toward him, but Owen took 2 steps back. He asked her not to touch him. Her expression broke apart. It was as if, in that moment, she realized nothing she could say would carry any weight. Marcus stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. Rachel, sobbing, begged him to listen, that it wasn't what it looked like, that she still loved him. Owen cut her off firmly, saying that love had died the moment she allowed another man to take his place while he fought for his life. He said he could have forgiven anything, except that she chose to betray him while he was fighting to survive. Rachel, in tears, went to the bedroom to get her bag. Owen didn't follow her. He stayed in the same spot. Marcus, still silent, left before her, head down, as if carrying an invisible weight. When Rachel came back, eyes red and shoulders slumped, she tried one last time. She said it had all been a mistake, that she was ashamed, that she never meant to hurt him. Owen didn't respond. He opened the door and stayed silent, as if the gesture spoke for itself. She left. The house, once full of shared memories, now felt strange, faded, empty. Owen remained standing there, the bouquet still on the floor, staring into the void for long minutes. His father, who had waited in the car, came in only when he realized something was very wrong. He found his son standing in the living room, not crying, but with eyes that looked shattered. Owen simply said he needed to be alone for a while. In the days that followed, Owen told Rachel the marriage was over. He said he didn't want to see Marcus, that he should stop trying to explain himself. He called Rachel while she was at work and told her she could come pick up her things with her sister. He asked her not to return to the house and not to contact him again. Rachel, still in shock, went to her sister's house, where she spent the following days isolated, trying to understand what she had done. The news of the separation spread quickly. Mutual friends started distancing themselves from Marcus. Some tried to reach out to Owen, but he avoided conversations. He needed silence, space, some way to reorganize his mind. Medical visits continued, now on an outpatient basis. But there was something inside him that no doctor could treat. It was the pain of someone who fought to survive and discovered he'd been betrayed not by death, but by the person who promised to stand by him. Owen spent the following days on autopilot, attending medical appointments on time but with no spark in his eyes. Doctors were pleased with the results, his condition remained stable and promising. The illness seemed under control, but emotionally he seemed sicker than ever. Ava Sullivan, the nurse who had cared for him throughout his hospital stay, was the first to notice. She knew him well enough to see that, despite the physical signs of recovery, there was a dullness in his gaze that didn't match the good news. Owen answered technical questions politely, but his face showed exhaustion, not physical, but the kind that comes when something vital breaks inside. Ava didn't push. She just started treating him with even more care. She'd exchange a few extra words at each visit, offer coffee, ask about the dog. Small gestures, no pressure. It was during one of these visits that Owen, not sure why, told her the marriage was over. Ava, surprised, just listened. He didn't go into details, but said he'd been betrayed, that it had come as a shock, and that he still didn't know how to rebuild himself. Ava listened quietly. She didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just showed up. And that's how it started. From then on, Owen began to notice that with her, he could breathe a little easier. There were no judgments, just listening. No promises, just a calm presence that didn't demand anything. Their conversations became more frequent, sometimes stretching a little beyond the end of the appointment, over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, or while waiting for the next call. Ava shared small stories from daily life, talked about her childhood in the countryside, her night shifts, and patients who had marked her career. Owen, in turn, felt safe speaking without filters. Rachel, on the other hand, lived the opposite. Staying at her sister's house, she spent her days in silence. She tried to keep her relationship with Marcus, thinking that somehow it would validate what she'd done. But what had started as an escape turned into an unstable connection. Marcus became distant, avoided serious talks, and got irritated easily. Their meetings grew less frequent, and over time, Rachel started feeling used. The hope that this could become a new beginning slowly faded. Weeks later, she saw a notification on his phone and discovered he was involved with a coworker. When confronted, he didn't deny it. He said they'd never made anything serious official. Rachel ended it then. For the first time, she felt the full weight of the choices she'd made. She'd lost her husband, lost her friend, and now found herself alone, surrounded by judgment and silent stares. Meanwhile, Owen began to realize there was something about Ava that went beyond professional empathy. It was the way she remembered details from past conversations, how she'd bring a chocolate bar when he mentioned liking a certain flavor, or how she'd laugh freely when he told some absurd story from his teenage years. It wasn't a rushed involvement or something heavy with expectations. It was simple, careful, quiet. Both seemed to understand that a connection was forming slowly. Owen, still hurt, felt that with Ava he didn't have to hide his feelings. It was as if, beside her, he could just exist without having to explain anything. Her presence, steady yet gentle, started filling spaces inside him that had only been empty before. Neither of them called it anything more than what it was. There was no label. Just a good presence in the middle of chaos. Over time, the appointments became more than just medical check-ins. They were moments he looked forward to with quiet anticipation. Owen didn't know where this was going, didn't make plans, but he wasn't the same man who'd left the hospital months earlier. Gradually, without exactly realizing when, Ava had become a point of balance. And for the first time since the betrayal, he felt it might be possible to experience something new, even if slowly, safely, and differently. It wasn't about forgetting Rachel or erasing what had happened. It was about allowing himself to look forward with less pain and more presence. It was about rediscovering himself through someone else's calm. Rachel tried to quietly rebuild her life. She kept working, but the environment wasn't the same. She noticed people avoiding her gaze, conversation stopping when she entered the teacher's lounge, and a coldness that hadn't been there before. At home, in her sister's house where she now lived, the days were long and heavy. She started therapy, returned to her graduate studies she'd put on hold months earlier, and tried to keep busy with activities that distracted her. But everything felt shallow. She carried not just regret for the betrayal, but guilt for the moment she chose to betray. Slowly, she began to understand that the mistake wasn't just in the act, but in her lack of emotional maturity to sustain a relationship in the face of someone else's pain. She'd confused loneliness with freedom, and now she was paying the exact price for that confusion. Marcus, on the other hand, disappeared completely. After being transferred to another city, he cut off contact with his old friend group and never reached out to Rachel again. Scattered stories surfaced about a new relationship with a coworker that had caused internal problems at his job. It was as if he was repeating the same pattern, just in a different place with different people. Owen, meanwhile, was moving in the opposite direction. He returned to his routine quietly. He kept up with follow-up appointments, took short walks around town, and slowly started reclaiming spaces that once seemed out of reach. His growing closeness with Ava unfolded like a seed sprouting without fanfare. One ordinary afternoon, she brought him a book he'd mentioned in a previous conversation. Owen read it in silence, and when he finished, he wrote a short note on the inside cover, thanking her for crossing his path. Ava, as intuitive as ever, understood that Owen wasn't looking for comfort, but truth. He'd already been deceived by the person who promised to stand by him. With her, there were no promises, just presence. No vows, just consistency. They started meeting outside the hospital more often, long coffees, short walks, shared silences. It was all simple, honest, unhurried. Ava knew how to wait, and Owen felt, even if he wouldn't admit it, that this was exactly what he needed. Neither of them used labels. They were two adults who had lived different losses, but found comfort in each other. There was no rush for a new beginning, just the naturalness of allowing themselves to start over. On an ordinary day, at the end of an appointment, Owen left the hospital and saw Ava sitting under a tree, reading. He walked over, she looked up and smiled. They sat side by side and stayed there for a while. Neither said anything important, but there was a peace that spoke for itself. It was a different kind of silence from the one Owen had felt when he was betrayed. This silence didn't hurt. That moment didn't symbolize the start of a new love or the end of a journey. It was simply a point of balance. An instant when life, despite everything, felt possible again. And for Owen, that was more than enough. Owen didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to control everything. He didn't need to understand every detail of what he'd lost, nor predict every step of what might come. The pain that once filled every corner now coexisted with something lighter, almost imperceptible, but real. It was like a healed wound that still ached on rainy days, but no longer bled. Sitting beside Ava, he realized that starting over wasn't about erasing the past, but making peace with it. And on that ordinary afternoon, under just any tree, Owen finally understood that surviving was only the beginning. What he was doing now was truly living. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.